1 month after the Varrock's attack. Tae-young submitted his transfer request. The paperwork was processed within hours, approved without comment, and his departure was scheduled for the next available transport off. Vareth 7. He packed his belongings into a single bag, which did not take long because he had never accumulated much during his 3 years on the colonies. Of clothes, some books, a few photographs from Earth that had grown faded with time, the essentials of a life that had never really put down roots. Chief Security Officer Taemin Ro came to see him on his last night. "You do not have to leave," Taemin said. "The other humans here respect you, and after what you did, even some of the Kirith have started to change how they see us." Some, Tae-young agreed, not the ones that matter. Change takes time. I know. But I do not have to be here while it happens. Taemin studied him with tired eyes. The administrator's words really got to you. It was not a question. It was not just the words. Tae-young said slowly. It was everything she meant by them. Everything she believed. I almost died for her daughter, and she could not even see me as a person worth acknowledging. He shook his head. I do not blame her for being what she is, but I cannot stay here and pretend it does not matter. Where will you go? Back to Earth, maybe, or one of the outer colonies where humans run things ourselves. Somewhere I can just be a man instead of a member of an inferior species. Taemin nodded and extended his hand. For what it is worth. You are one of the best men I have ever served with. Tae-young shook his hand firmly. Take care of them. Taemin, the humans here, they need someone looking out for them. Always. The next morning, Tae-young walked through the colony one last time, taking in the sights he had grown used to over the years, the towering crystal structures of the Kirith district, the modest prefab buildings of the human quarters, the rocky wasteland that stretched to the horizon in every direction. It had never felt like home, but it had been the closest thing he had for a long time. He was almost at the transport platform when he heard running footsteps behind him. Wait. He turned and saw Yuna racing toward him, her small legs pumping furiously. Her attendants trailing behind with expressions of alarm and resignation. She crashed into him at full speed, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding on like she would never let go. You cannot leave, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. I have to, little one. But who will talk to me? Who will tell me stories about Earth? Who will? She stopped, and when she looked up at him, there were tears on her crystal face. Actual tears that should have been impossible for her species. Who will make me feel like humans are not bad? Tae-young knelt down to her level, ignoring the pain in his still healing body. Yuna, humans are not bad, and neither are Kirith. People are just people, some good, some not so good. Some scared and confused and trying their best. Like my mother? The question caught him off guard. Your mother loves you very much. She said terrible things to you. Yes, she did. And you are not angry? Tae-young thought about that for a moment. I was angry and hurt and sad. But holding on to those feelings would not change anything. It would just make me miserable. He reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face. Your mother was scared. Yuna, scared of what my actions meant for your family. Scared of change. Scared of a world where the rules she grew up with do not apply anymore. And scared people say cruel things sometimes. That does not make it okay? No, it does not. But it helps me understand. Yuna sniffled and reached into the pouch at her side. I made something for you, she said, pulling out her hand and revealing a small crystal that glowed with soft blue light. It is part of me, from my own body. We only give these to people who matter more than anything. Tae-young stared at the crystal in her palm even. With his limited knowledge of Kirith culture, he knew what this meant. It was the highest gift one Kirith could give another. A piece of their very being. A bond that transcended all other ties. Yuna, I cannot accept this. Yes, you can. she said fiercely, pressing the crystal into his hand. You are not nothing. You are brave and kind, and you saved me when no one else would. And I do not care what my mother says or what the council thinks or what anyone believes about humans. Her small hands closed around his. You matter. Di-Young Park, you matter to me. He felt something crack in his chest. But this time, it was not breaking. It was opening. Thank you, he whispered. Take care of yourself, little one, and remember what I told you. Everyone deserves someone willing to fight for them, even humans. Even Kirith, he paused. Even your mother. Yuna nodded solemnly. I will remember. Di-Young stood and walked toward the transport platform. The crystal warm in his hand. He was almost at the boarding ramp when he heard another voice behind him. Sergeant Park. He turned and saw Administrator Sioha standing at the edge of the platform. A white crystal skin gleaming in the morning light, she looked different than before, less certain. With something in her eyes that he could not quite identify, they stared at each other across the distance. Neither moving. Yuna gave you her crystal, Sioha said finally. Yes. Do you know what that means? I know it means she thinks I am worth something. Sioha flinched at the echo of her own words. Sergeant Park. She stopped, struggling with something internal. What I said to you was cruel and unjust. I was angry and frightened, and I spoke from fear rather than truth. Di-Young waited. My daughter has not spoken to me since that day, Sioha continued. Her voice strained. She attends her lessons and her functions, but she looks at me like I am a stranger. Like I am someone she does not recognize. Children see more than we think. Yes, they do. Sioha took a step forward. I do not know how to fix what I broke. I do not know how to make her understand that I was wrong. I have never had to admit that I was wrong before. It is not something my people do easily. Admitting you were wrong is not about your people, Di-Young said quietly. It is about you. I know. She stood there, proud and broken and lost, and Di-Young saw her clearly. For the first time, not as an administrator or a Kirith or an enemy, just as a mother who had failed her daughter and did not know how to make it right. Tell her the Mayant truth, he said. Tell her you were scared and that fear made you say things you should not have said. Tell her you are sorry, really sorry, not because it benefits you, but because it is the right thing to do. And if she does not forgive me, then you keep trying until she does. That is what parents do. The transport's engines began to hum, signaling that departure was imminent. Di-Young turned toward the ramp. Sergeant Park. He looked back one last time. Sioha's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. I was wrong, she said finally, barely above a whisper. Not just about Velasorn or about the dead. I was wrong about you. About humans, about everything. I thought I knew. It was not an apology. It was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. No. Nodded once and walked up the ramp into the transport. He found a seat by the window and watched the colony shrink below him as the ship rose into the schooner. Was standing on the platform, waving with both arms, her small figure getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely beside her. Sioha stood motionless, watching the ship carry away the human who had changed everything. The crystal in Di-Young's hand pulsed with gentle warmth, a reminder that some connections transcended species and culture and all the barriers the people built between themselves. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if Sioha would find her way back to her daughter, or if the Kirith would ever truly accept humans as equals, but he knew that something had shifted on Vara 7, something small but significant. Like the first crack in a dam that would eventually let the flood through. Change takes time. Tammin had said maybe that was true, and maybe, somewhere out there in the vast galaxy, there was a little girl with crystal skin who would grow up remembering that a human once fought through 20 monsters for her, not for money, not for status, not for anything except the simple belief that her life was worth saving. That was the kind of memory that changed worlds. Dae-Young closed his eyes and let the hum of the engines carry him toward home, wherever that turned out to be. And somewhere far below, Yuna turned to her mother and said 4 words that cracked something open inside Seolha's chest. I gave him mine. Seolha looked down at her daughter, at the space on her arm where the crystal had been, and finally understood the weight of what she had almost thrown away. I know, she whispered. Why? Yuna asked the same question she had asked Dae-Young in that blood-soaked corridor. Seolha knelt down and pulled her daughter into an embrace, holding her tightly, feeling the warmth of her small body against her own cold crystal skin. Because you were right, she said. He deserved it. It was not enough, it would never be enough, but it was a start. 2 weeks passed before Administrator Seolha came to see Dae-Young again. In that time, he had been moved from the Kirith Medical Bay to the Human Recovery Ward, which was smaller and less advanced, but at least felt familiar. His wounds were healing slowly, leaving behind scars that mapped the story of his fight across his skin. The doctors told him he was lucky to be alive. Dae-Young was not sure luck had anything to do with it. Yuna continued to visit despite her mother's obvious disapproval, sneaking away from her attendants to sit beside his bed and fill the silence with her endless questions. She wanted to know everything about Earth, about humans, about the life Dae-Young had lived before coming to Vera 7. He told her what he could. Stories about cities and oceans and forests, full of trees that were not crystal but actually green and alive. She listened with wonder in her eyes. And for brief moments, Dae-Young forgot about the pain in his chest and the numbness in his arm. And the 14th day, Seolha appeared in the doorway of his room. She looked different than before, less composed, with shadows under her eyes that suggested she had not been sleeping well. The coldness was still there, but it seemed brittle now, like ice that was starting to crack. Sergeant Park, she said formally. May I speak with you? You are already here. Seolha entered the room and closed the door behind her, then stood with her back against the wall, as if she was afraid to get too close. I have been consulting with the council elders about the matter of Velasorn, she began. They are quite insistent that the debt must be acknowledged publicly and formally. I already told you I do not want anything. Yes, you did. And that has created something of a crisis among our leadership, Seolha said with a bitter edge to her voice. You see, Velasorn is not just about repaying a debt. It is about recognizing the worth of the person who created that debt. And your refusal to accept payment implies that you believe my daughter's life is beyond any price I could offer. Dae-Young shrugged, which hurt more than he expected. She is a child. Her life is priceless. That is not complicated. It is very complicated. Seolha snapped, her composure cracking. Do you have any idea what you have done? By refusing payment, you have placed yourself above me in the eyes of our tradition. A human above a Kirith administrator. It is unprecedented. It is unacceptable. It is... She stopped herself, pressing her hands against her temples. It is impossible to explain to someone who does not understand our culture. Then help me understand. Seolha looked at him with something that might have been frustration or might have been desperation. Among the Kirith, worth is everything. It determines your place in society, your rights, your future. And worth is measured by lineage, by achievement, by the respect you command from others. She began to pace. When you saved Yuna and refused compensation, you essentially declared that your worth exceeded anything I could offer. And because Velasorn is sacred law, the council must acknowledge that declaration. I did not declare anything, Dae-Young said patiently. I just did not want your money. The effect is the same. Seolha stopped pacing and faced him directly. Do you know what it would mean for my family if the council formally recognizes a human as having greater worth than the Kirith of my standing? My daughter would carry that shame forever. My lineage would be tainted. Everything I have worked to build would be destroyed. Dae-young considered this for a long moment. So you want me to accept payment so that the debt is settled and your status is preserved? Yes, even though I do not want anything. What you want is irrelevant. Seol has shouted, then caught herself and lowered her voice. Please, I am asking you to accept compensation. Name anything you desire. I will find a way to provide it. Just tell me what you want so that this nightmare can end. There was something almost desperate in her voice. And Dae-young felt a flicker of sympathy for her despite everything. She was trapped by her own traditions, caught in a web of cultural expectations that she could not escape. But sympathy did not change the facts. I cannot name a price for saving a child's life, he said quietly. It would not be honest. Then lie. I am not going to lie about something like this. Seol stared at him with an expression that slowly shifted from desperation to something colder and harder. You do not understand what you are refusing, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You could have anything. Wealth, status, power, things that humans on this colony can only dream about. And you are throwing it all away for what? Principle? Pride? Basic decency. Decency. Seoha repeated the word like it tasted bitter. You speak of decency while you ruin my family with your stubborn nobility. I am not trying to ruin anyone. Then what do you want? She demanded. Tell me what you really want. Not what you think you should want. Not what makes you look righteous. Tell me the truth. Dae-young met her eyes and saw genuine fear beneath the anger. She was terrified of what his refusal meant. Not just for her status, but for her daughter's future. And that fear had driven her to this point of desperation. Part of him wanted to give her what she needed, to accept some token payment and let her preserve her pride. But he thought about Yuna's face when she asked him why he had fought for her, and he knew he could not do it. The truth is that I do not want anything from you, he said. I saved your daughter because she needed saving, not because I expected a reward. And no amount of money or status is going to change that. Something in Soha's expression hardened into stone. Then let me tell you a truth in return, she said, her voice suddenly calm and cold. You think you are being noble, refusing payment, acting as if my daughter's life matters more to you than it does to me. But you are only revealing how little you understand. She stepped closer, her crystal skin catching the light and throwing it back in sharp, angry patterns. You are just a human Sergeant Park, one of thousands who work in our mines and guard our fences and do the jobs we find too tedious or dangerous. You have nothing of value except your labor, and you are nothing except what we allow you to be. The words hit Dae-young like physical blows, but he did not look away. My daughter's life is worth more than your entire species combined, Seola continued, her voice rising. I will not be bound to something like you. I will not have my lineage shamed by acknowledging debt to a creature who should be grateful we allow him to exist on our world. Silence filled the room. Dae-young looked at her for a long moment, seeing the fear and the pride and the desperate need to believe that her worth was beyond question, and he felt something inside him break. Not his body this time, but something deeper. Then you are free, he said quietly. Consider the debt paid. What? You do not owe me anything, Dae-young said, his voice flat and tired. Tell your council that I released you from Velosaur. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. I do not care anymore. Seola blinked, caught off guard. You cannot simply release. I just did. He turned away from her, facing the wall. I do not want anything from someone who thinks a child's life needs to be worth something. And I do not want to be bound to someone who sees me as less than nothing. So go ahead, take your freedom, preserve your precious status, and leave me alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dae-young heard footsteps moving toward the door. "This is not finished," Seoha said. "It is for me." The door opened and closed, and Dae-young was alone. He lay in the silence, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on him like stones. He had known from the beginning that the Kirith looked down on humans, that they saw his species as inferior and unworthy of respect, but hearing it spoken so clearly, so cruelly, by someone whose daughter he had nearly died to, save that was something different, that was something that left marks no medicine could heal. He did not cry. He had forgotten how, but something inside him that had survived 20 Varaks finally gave up, and when Kiet, a small voice, came from the doorway, "I heard everything." Dae-young turned and saw Yuna standing there, her crystal skin dim with what he now recognized as grief. Her small hands balled into fists at her sides. "You should not have heard that," he said. "But I did." She walked to his bed and climbed up beside him, wrapping her thin arms around his chest, despite the bandages and the wounds. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Dae-young did not know what to say. Oh, he just held her and let the silence speak for him. The rescue team found them in the corridor, surrounded by 20 dead Varaks and enough blood to paint the walls. Riduna was kneeling beside the human, her small hands pressed against the worst of his wounds, as if she could hold his life inside his body through sheer force of will. Her crystalline skin was stained with his blood, and she was shaking so badly that the light reflecting off her surface looked like a strobe. "Help him!" she screamed when she saw the medics. "You have to help him!" The Kirith medical team hesitated at the entrance to the corridor, their elegant faces showing something between confusion and distaste. They were trained to treat their own kind, not humans. And the creature lying in a pool of blood before them was very clearly not Kirith. "He's just a human," one of them said carefully. "The human medical bay is on the other side of the complex, and we should not help him." Yuna shrieked with a fury that made even the adults flinch backward. "He killed all of them for me. He saved my life. If you do not help him right now, I will never forgive you. I will never forgive any of you." Perhaps it was the sight of a child so distraught. Perhaps it was the dawning realization of what had actually happened in this corridor. Perhaps it was simply easier to comply than to argue, whatever the reason. The Kirith medics moved forward and began working on Dae-young's broken body. They loaded him onto a hovering stretcher and rushed him toward the medical bay. And Yuna ran alongside them the entire way, refusing to let go of his hand even when the adults told her she was in the way behind them. The security teams began documenting the scene and counting the bodies. 20 Varaks, all dead. All killed by a single human with nothing but basic weapons and pure determination. The news spread through the colony like wildfire 3 days later. Dae-young woke up in a bed that was too soft and a room that was too bright. He tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain flared through every inch of his body. His left arm was immobilized in some kind of advanced healing cast, and when he breathed, he could feel something strange in his lungs, a tightness that had not been there before. "You are awake," the voice came from his right, and he turned his head to find Chief Security Officer Teeman Rowe sitting in a chair beside his bed. The older man looked tired but relieved. "How long?" Dae-young managed to ask. 3 days, Teeman replied. "The Kirith medics were not sure you would make it, but you are apparently too stubborn to die." Dae-young tried to laugh and ended up coughing instead. "The girl? Safe, thanks to you, though she has been haunting this medical bay like a ghost ever since you got here." Timon leaned forward with a serious expression. "Do you have any idea what you did?" "Killed some bugs. You killed 20 Varaks single-handed in close quarters with no backup and no proper equipment," Taman said flatly. "That is not killing some bugs. That is the kind of thing they write legends about. Dae-young closed his eyes and tried to remember the fight, but it was all fragments and flashes. Pain and fear and the desperate need to keep moving. I did what anyone would have done. No, Taemin said quietly, you did what no one else would have done. Because no one else was crazy enough to try. He paused. The Kirith are talking about you. And I do not just mean the workers. I mean the high caste administrators and the council elders. All of them buzzing about the human who walked through 20 monsters to save one of their children. I did not do it because she was Kirith, Dae-young said. I know. Taemin replied, that is what makes it impressive. Over the next few days, Dae-young learned the full extent of his injuries. The venom had scarred his lungs, leaving permanent damage that would make breathing difficult for the rest of his life. His left arm would heal, but never regain full mobility he had lost. Significant muscle mass from the wounds and would need months of rehabilitation before he could return to active duty, if he could return to active duty at all. The human doctors who came to examine him were blunt about his prognosis. He would live, but he would never be the Sama. Dae-young accepted this news with the same quiet stoicism he had shown throughout his time on Vera 7. It was what it was. He had made a choice, and choices had consequences. Yuna visited him every day. Much to the obvious displeasure of her attendants and guards, she would sit beside his bed and talk about anything and everything, telling him about her lessons and her friends and her dreams of one day traveling to Earth to see where humans came from. Dae-young mostly listened, saving his breath for when he really needed it. But he found her company surprisingly pleasant. She was bright and curious and utterly without the coldness that characterized most adult Kirith. The fifth day, Elder Haejin came to see him. She was ancient, even by Kirith standards. Her crystal skin clouded with age and covered in intricate patterns that marked her as one of the highest-ranking members of their society. She moved slowly, but with a dignity that commanded respect. And when she sat down in the chair beside his bed, Dae-young found himself sitting up straighter despite the pain. Sergeant Park, she said in a voice like wind chimes. I wanted to speak with you before the others did. Others? Administrator Seolha is on her way, the elder said. She has been putting this off for as long as possible, but she cannot avoid it any longer. Avoid what? Haejin studied him with those dark, ancient eyes. Are you familiar with the concept of Velason? Dae-young shook his head. It is an old tradition among our people, older than this colony, older than our expansion into the stars. The elder explained. When one person saves the life of another at great personal cost, a bond is formed between them. A debt that transcends social status, wealth, and even family ties. She paused. You saved Yuna's life by sacrificing your health and nearly your own life. And according to our most sacred laws, Administrator Seolha now owes you a debt that cannot be measured in credits or favors. Dae-young was not sure how to respond to that. I did not do it for any debt, he said finally. I did it because she was a child who needed help. I know, Haejin said softly. That is what makes this so difficult for Seolha to accept. Before Dae-young could ask what she meant, the door opened and Administrator Seolha swept into the room. She was as beautiful and cold as ever, her white crystal skin catching the light and throwing it back in sharp angles. Her dark eyes fixed on Dae-young with an expression he could not quite read. Leave us, she said to Elder Haejin. Without looking at her, the old Kirith rose slowly and moved toward the door. But she paused beside Seolha and said something too quiet for Dae-young to hear, whatever it was. It made Seolha's jaw tighten with anger. Then Haejin was gone, and Dae-young was alone with the woman who had threatened to destroy his life just for speaking to her daughter. Sergeant Park, Seolha said, her voice carefully controlled. I have come to discuss the matter of your actions during the Varax breach. All right. She clasped her hands in front of her. a formal gesture that Dae-young recognized from Kirith's diplomatic proceedings. You saved my daughter's life, and according to our traditions, this creates a significant obligation on my part. I did not ask for any obligation. That is irrelevant. Sioha replied sharply. The debt exists whether you want it to or not, and I am here to settle it. She reached into her robes and produced a data tablet. I am prepared to offer you triple your remaining contract payment. Immediate release from your work obligations, first-class transport back to Earth, and a letter of recommendation that will open doors at any security firm in the human territories. Dae-young looked at the tablet but did not take it. Is that what you think your daughter's life is worth? He asked quietly. 3 times my salary and a nice letter? Sioha's eyes narrowed. What do you want then? Name your price. I do not have a price, Dae-young said. I told you, I did not save her for payment. Then why? Because she was scared and alone and surrounded by monsters, and I could help for a long moment. Sioha just stared at him, and Dae-young saw something flicker across her face that might have been confusion or might have been something else. Entirely. That is not an answer, she said finally. It is the only answer I have. Sioha's composure cracked, just for an instant, before the mask slid back into place. We will discuss this further when you have recovered, she said coldly. Then she turned and walked out, leaving Dae-young alone with his thoughts and his pain and the strange feeling that something important had just happened. He just was not sure what. The first Virax lunged at Dae-young with its jaws open wide, and he sidestepped just in time to feel the rush of air against his face. He fired twice into its exposed throat, and the creature crashed to the ground in a heap of twitching limbs. 19 left. The corridor was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 humans to walk side by side, and Dae-young used that to his advantage. The Virax were large creatures, built for open spaces and pack tactics, and in this tight space they could only come at him a few at a time. He backed up slowly, drawing them away from Yuna, making himself the only target worth chasing. The second and third came together, their armored bodies scraping against the walls as they fought to reach him first. Dae-young dropped to one knee and fired upward, catching one under the jaw, where the armor was thinnest. The other slammed into him before he could adjust his aim, and he felt something in his shoulder pop as he hit the wall. Pain exploded through his arm. But he did not have time to think about Ive. Jammed his weapon against the creature's eye and pulled the trigger until it stopped moving. 17 left. Run, he shouted at Yuna without looking back. Find another way out. But the girl did not move, frozen in place by fear or shock or something else entirely. Jung did not have time to worry about that now. Next Virax was already on him, and he barely got his arm up in time to block its snapping jaws. The teeth sank into his forearm instead of his throat, and he screamed as venom burned through his blood like liquid fire. He brought his knee up hard into the creature's underbelly, found a gap in the armor plates, and twisted his boot knife into the soft flesh beneath. The Virax released him and staggered back, and Dae-young used the moment to put 3 rounds through its skull. 16 left. His arm was going numb from the venom, and he could feel something wet running down his side. There was probably blood. The corridor ahead was full of clicking, snarling monsters, and behind him, a little girl was counting on him to keep them away. He had never felt more alive in his entire life. 2 more Virax came at him, and he grabbed a loose pipe from the wall and swung it like a baseball bat. The impact sent the first one stumbling into its partner, and Dae-young used the confusion to duck past them and create some distance. He spotted a steam vent on the wall, one of the emergency pressure releases for the mining equipment, and he remembered his training. Cover your eyes, he yelled at Yuna, and then he shot the vent control. Superheated steam exploded into the corridor, and the Virax screamed in a sound that was almost human. 3 of them collapsed immediately, their armored shells cracking from the sudden temperature change, their soft internal organs cooking inside their bodies. 13 left, but the steam also filled the corridor with scalding mist. And Dae-Young felt his skin blistering as he pushed through it toward the other side. He could barely see, could barely breathe, but he kept moving because stopping meant dying. The next Varax came out of the mist like a nightmare, and Dae-Young was too slow to dodge its claws raked across his chest, tearing through his armor and the flesh beneath. And he felt ribs crack under the impact. He fell backward, and the creature was on top of him in an instant. Its weight crushing the air from his lungs, Dae-Young grabbed one of its venomous spines with his bare hand, ignoring the burning agony that shot through his palm, and he ripped it free from the creature's body. Then he drove that spine directly into its eye. 12 left. He rolled to his feet somehow, though he could not remember how, and found himself face to face with 3 more Varax blocking the corridor behind him. He could hear more approaching, cutting off any retreat. His weapon was almost empty, his body was failing, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice was telling him that this was how it ended. But then he looked past the monsters and saw Yuna still standing there, her small hands pressed over her mouth, her crystal skin flickering with colors he had never seen before. Fear. He realized that was what fear looked like on a Karethi. Thought about all the times the Kirith had looked at him like he was nothing, like humans were just tools to be used and discarded. Thought about Seol's contempt and the way she had threatened him for simply talking to her daughter. And then he thought about how none of that mattered right now, because there was a scared little girl who needed someone to save her. He reloaded his weapon with the last magazine and smiled through bloody teeth. Okay, he said to no one in particular. Let's keep going. He charged forward and met the Varax head-on. Next few minutes became a blur of violence and pain and desperate survival. Dae-Young fought with everything he had, using his weapon until it was empty, then using his knife, then using his fists and his elbows and his teeth. He used the environment against them, collapsing ceiling panels onto their heads, luring them into electrical conduits and triggering shorts that fried their nervous systems, shoving them into each other and letting their own venom-tipped spines do the work. 8 left, 5 left, 3 left. Each kill cost him something new. A deep gash across his back, a broken finger, a chunk of flesh torn from his thigh. The venom was spreading through his system, making his vision blur and his thoughts scatter like leaves in a storm. But he kept fighting. The 19th Varax died with Dae-Young's knife buried in its throat, and the 20th came at him before he could pull the blade free. He caught its charge with his damaged shoulder and felt the bone give way entirely. The pain was so intense that he almost blacked out, but he held on somehow, wrapping his good arm around the creature's neck and squeezing with everything he had left. They fell together, rolling across the blood-slicked floor, and Dae-Young ended up on top. He did not have a weapon. He did not have the strength to strangle it, but he had his forehead, and he had desperation. And he brought his head down again and again until the creature stopped moving. 20 Young collapsed beside the last corpse, unable to move, unable to think, barely able to breathe. The corridor was silent, except for the sound of his own labored breathing and the soft footsteps approaching from behind. Small hands touched his face, crystal smooth and cool against his burning skin. Why? Yuna whispered, her voice breaking. Why did you do that? Dae-Young tried to focus on her face, but everything was swimming in and out of darkness. Because you were scared, he managed to say, and I could help, but you are hurt, she said. And there were tears in her voice, if not in her eyes. You are hurt so badly. Worth it, he whispered somewhere in the distance. He could hear voices shouting and footsteps running. Rescue was coming. He had done it, closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. And the last thing he felt was a small hand holding his own. The mining colony of Virith 7 sat on the edge of known space, a place where humans came to work and aliens came to profit. Sergeant Dae-young Park stood at his post near the perimeter fence, watching the twin suns sink below the rocky horizon and paint the sky in shades of orange and purple that he had grown used to over the past 3 years. He was 34 years old, average height, with a face that most people forgot the moment they looked away from it, that suited him fine. He had learned long ago that being forgettable kept a man alive in places like this. The Kirith owned this colony and everything in it, including the contracts of every human worker who had signed away 5 years of their lives for the promise of good pay and a ticket back to Earth. They were beautiful creatures. The Kirith, standing 7 feet tall with skin that looked like living crystal, catching light and throwing it back in soft rainbow patterns. Their eyes were large and dark, and when they looked at humans, there was always something cold in their gaze, something that said they were measuring worth and finding it lacking. Dae-young had stopped caring about that look a long time ago. He did his job, kept his head down, and counted the days until his contract ended. Tonight was like any other night, until he heard the small footsteps behind him, turned and found a Kirith child standing in the dust, her crystalline skin glowing faintly blue in the fading light. She could not have been more than 7 years old in human terms. Tiny by Kirith standards, with eyes that held more curiosity than coldness. "You should not be here, little one," Dae-young said quietly. The child tilted her head and studied him like he was a puzzle she wanted to solve. "Why do humans stay outside?" she asked in accented but clear speech. "We guard the fence." "From what?" Dae-young glanced toward the dark mountains in the distance, where the deep mines carved tunnels into the planet's crust from things that live in the dark. The child took a step closer. "Unafraid. My name is Yuna," she announced. "I know who you are," Dae-young replied, because everyone on the colony knew the daughter of Administrator Seolha, the highest-ranking Kirith on Vareth 7. "What is your name?" "Park Dae-young." "That is a strange name. It is a Korean name." From Earth, Yuna seemed to consider this information carefully before nodding, as if she had filed it away for later. "I like watching humans," she said suddenly. "You move differently than we do, and you make interesting sounds when you talk to each other." Before Dae-young could respond, a sharp voice cut through the evening air. "Yuna!" The child flinched, and Dae-young saw Administrator Seolha striding toward them with fury written across her elegant features. She was tall even for a Kirith, and her crystal skin was the pale white of fresh snow, a sign of ancient bloodline and high status. Her dark eyes fixed on Dae-young with naked disgust. "Step away from my daughter," she commanded. Dae-young moved back immediately, hands visible at his sides, showing he meant no threat. Seolha grabbed Yuna's arm and pulled her close. "What have I told you about wandering near the human quarters?" she demanded. "I was just talking to him," Yuna protested. "He was nice? Nice?" Seolha's voice dripped with contempt. "They are workers, Yuna, nothing more. And you will not contaminate yourself by associating with them." She turned that cold gaze on Dae-young one final time. "If you speak to my daughter again, I will have your contract terminated and you shipped to the prison colonies. Do you understand?" "Yes, Administrator," Dae-young said flatly. Seolha swept away with Yuna in tow, and the little girl looked back over her shoulder with something like apology in her eyes. Dae-young returned to watching the horizon and tried to feel nothing at all. 3 hours later, the alarms began to scream. Dae-young was in the security station with Chief Security Officer Taemin Ro when the first reports came flooding in. Something had broken through the lower mine tunnels, and whatever it was, there were a lot of them. "Varax," Taemin said grimly, pulling up footage on the screens. The creatures were nightmares made flesh. 6-limbed predators with armored shells and spines that dripped venom. They moved fast, faster than anything that Psi should move. And they hunted in packs. "I thought the sonic barriers kept them out," Dae-young said. They did, Tiemann replied, until they didn't. On the screen, Dae-Young watched a Vorax tear through a mining robot like it was made of paper. Get every human with combat training to the mid-level corridors, Tiemann ordered. We need to hold them back while the Kirith evacuate. The Kirith security forces are ceremonial at best. Tiemann interrupted. They haven't faced a real threat in 1,000 years, and their weapons are designed for show. Not for killing. He met Dae-Young's eyes. This is on. U.S. Dae-Young grabbed his gear and headed for the corridors. The colony had descended into chaos by the time he reached the mid-level. Skirth ran in every direction. Their graceful movements turned clumsy by fear. Their beautiful faces twisted with an emotion they clearly did not know how to process. Humans moved among them, trying to direct traffic and establish defensive positions. But it was like herding cats during an earthquake. Dae-Young took command of a small group of workers near the main junction and started organizing a barricade. They had mining tools and a few proper weapons between them. Not enough to stop an army, but maybe enough to buy time. He heard the Vorax before he saw them. A clicking sound like thousands of bones rattling together. And then the first one rounded the corner. It was even uglier up close. Dae-Young fired, and the shot punched through its eye, dropping it instantly. Hold the line, he shouted as more came pouring through. They held for 20 minutes, which felt like 20 hours, and when reinforcements finally arrived, Dae-Young left his position to check on the evacuation status. That was when he heard the scream. It was high and thin and absolutely terrified, and he recognized it immediately. Yuna ran toward the sound, ignoring the shouts behind him, pushing through panicked crowds until he reached a maintenance corridor that branched off from the main evacuation. Rota Yuna stood at the far end, pressed against a locked door, her small body shaking. Between her and Dae-Young were 20 Vorax. They had not noticed her yet, focused on something else, some piece of machinery that had caught their attention. But it would only be a matter of seconds before they turned. Dae-Young looked at the girl, looked at the monsters, and did the math in his head. 20 against 1. No backup, no way out. He thought about his contract, about Earth, about all the days he had left to live if he just turned around and walked away. Then he thought about a little girl who had called his name strange and said she liked watching humans. He stepped into the corridor. The first Vorax turned toward him, and he raised his weapon. Hey, he said quietly. Over here. All 20 of them focused on him at once, behind them. Yuna's eyes went wide. Dae-Young smiled at her. Just once, and then he started moving forward.